What is up, you guys? Glitches here, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm bringing you my go-to Way of Winter shrapnel build. I know I mentioned I was going to be making the Frost Vortex build first, but there's a few additional things that I wanted to test out with that in the late game first before I make that video. And also with the start of phase 2, we're starting to see more of the Chaos Weavers spawning on the map, and they're pretty much immune to status damage. So once I reach the tier 5 rank, my first build that I kind of wanted to dive into, I wanted to make sure it was good for both PvE normal content as well as taking down those bigger Chaos Weaver bosses. So I decided to go with a shrapnel build first, and I'm actually having a ton of fun with the new LMG. That's going to be the primary weapon. So without any further ado, let's jump into the details. Before we get into the weapons, though, I want to preface this all by saying that I'm going to have timestamps down in the description, kind of organizing this video a little bit better, as well as a link in the description leading to a MetaBuilds website link. It'll have a full layout of this build in all its glory, so you guys can just use that as a quick reference and reference any of the mods that are selected, the weapons, things like that. It'll just be a little bit more efficient for you guys after the fact if you want to re-look it up. So feel free to check that link out as well. But first thing we can go over is the weapons. So obviously I had to run the new Conflicting Memories LMG. This is a really fun weapon. If we go over the basically weapon features, it says trigger shrapnel after every 12 hits. For every 40 magazine capacity, parts hit by shrapnel increases by +1. This is going to combo really well with our key armor that I'll go over here in a minute. For every 100 magazine capacity over the 4, shrapnel damage is increased by 15%. And it gets a flat +8 magazine capacity. So you're going to be getting a ton of ammunition in the mag for this weapon. And with some of our mods, we're going to be focusing on mag size as well. I did some testing, and when in combination with the particular key item we're going to be using, we can get upwards of like 166 plus rounds in the magazine. And if I believe from what I noticed, if you can get it above 160, 161, you can reach up to almost 10 part hits when you get to the full stacks with your shrapnel hits with the cage helmet, which is what we're going to be using. So really good combination there, and it does a ton of damage once it gets fully ramped up. And for those of you that don't know how shrapnel works, if we just look at this real quick, basically upon hitting an enemy with a bullet, deal 50% attack as weapon damage. Weapon damage is going to be really important in this build to a different random part of the enemy's body. Keep in mind that whatever part that you're shooting, your shrapnel parts will not hit that part. So if you have something like shrapnel souvenir, for example, which I'm not using in this particular build, where you want to hit the body because every time you hit a weak spot with shrapnel, you get ammo back. Make sure that you're aiming for the body if you're using those particular mods, because your shrapnel will not hit the weak spot if you're shooting the weak spot. So just keep that in mind. The element type is the same as the weapon element. This is also important, and I'll go over why here in a minute. And the additional damage can crit strike weak spots and will decay with distance. And then that is the math behind it. So that is how shrapnel works. But moving on to the weapon itself. For the calibration, I would highly recommend trying to get a gold rapid shot style mod. This will increase our fire rate by 10%, which is really good because we're going to be burning through a lot of ammunition, and a lot of our damage boosts are dependent on how fast we can get through our magazine. We're going to be losing 50 to our accuracy, but some of the accessories we're going to put on are going to mitigate that a little bit, and then we'll get an additional 10% fire rate after continuous firing for 2 seconds. I would also recommend trying to get a rapid shot mod calibration with double crit rate, because that's one thing that we're going to be lacking a little bit in this build. So double crit rate in your calibration will definitely help out as well. Moving on to the weapon itself. For the mod, the one that I am running is Shatter Them All. The more parts that shrapnel hits, the higher the shrapnel damage. Each part gets plus 15% up to 45% total. And like I said, if you have the maximum mag capacity possible, mine is sitting right now at 166 bullets in the mag. You can get upwards of 10 shrapnel part hits once it procs, which is insane. So this Shatter Them All violent variation ideally is going to do a ton of bonus damage for your shrapnel hits. Priority for substats that you want to focus on: crit damage, weapon damage for increased shrapnel damage, damage to great ones if you want damage bonus damage to bosses, and magazine capacity. The more magazine capacity we have, the better, in my opinion. So those are the 3 or 4 substats that I would focus on pretty much across every single one of our mods. So that is the mod for the gun. Moving on to accessories, and like I mentioned earlier, we want to try and max out accuracy as much as possible while still maintaining a bit of stability so we're not dancing all over the place when we shoot. So I run the muzzle hammer compensator. This has the best basically accuracy that you can get without having a drastic decrease in stability. So it's a good all-arounder for the muzzle. For the optic, I run the compact reflex sight. For the grip tactics slot, you could run the tactical laser sight to have a little bit faster aiming speed, but I'm actually running the Cobra grip because that gives you the maximum basically accuracy possible to mitigate that calibration mod a little bit. And then definitely you want to run the gold large LMG drum mag for obvious reasons. More ammunition, the better. So that's the accessories, and I'm running tungsten ammo. So that is our primary weapon. Moving on to the, and the other thing I quickly wanted to point out is the element type of this weapon is actually impact. Deals more damage against protocell units. This is going to come in handy mainly because the shrapnel damage type, element type that it's going to do is going to match the gun. Now, before when we were using the Last Valor, that was a different weapon elemental type, but because we're using impact, there is one particular hide that you can put on a piece of armor that's going to boost our damage even more, which I haven't seen a lot of creators mention in their shrapnel builds that are using this LMG. So I wanted to point that out. Keep in mind that impact is the weapon's element type, so really, really powerful ammunition type there for obvious reasons, for bosses and things like that. But moving on to the secondary weapon, the weapon of my choosing is going to be a bullseye wildfire pistol. For the calibration, I would recommend the portable style. It could be purple or gold, doesn't really matter. We're really just going to be using this to mark targets. And I believe the switching speed that you get for both purple and gold is 50% on both. So really the portable style is the way to go. Substats don't really matter. We're really just using that calibration for faster swap speed. And the cool thing with the wildfire is it has a 60% chance to trigger the bullseye when hitting a target, and there's an 80% chance to spread that bullseye to one enemy within a 15-meter radius. If there are no enemies within the area, weapon damage is increased by 25% for 10 seconds, and when hitting a weak spot of marked enemies, you get attack plus 3% for 10 seconds up to 3 stacks. That is particularly going to be just for the wildfire. The second you switch back to your main gun, you'll lose that attack bonus. But if you're shooting with a wildfire, it is nice because you get a little damage bump there. But moving on to the accessories. For the accessories, I run the tactical flash hider. Again, I like to try and get a high, nice, stable balance between accuracy and stability. So we're running the flash hider, compact reflex sight, integrated laser sight, and the extended pistol mag. For the mods, right now I have vulnerability on. This will increase the damage that we do by another 4% because bullseye in general will do 4% damage added onto an enemy. This will add another, or it does 8% to an enemy. Vulnerability amplifier will make that 16% to an enemy. So if you're going up against a boss, I would recommend having vulnerability amplifier. If you're going and just clearing out mass groups of mobs and doing like silo runs and things like that, then I would particularly recommend, if we go here, the spreading marks mod. When a marked enemy is defeated, the bullseye will spread to one additional enemy. This will combo really well with a mod that we're going to be putting on our mask, because it's going to be giving us bonus damage against all enemies that are marked. So the faster we can mark enemies, the better. So this one I like to run a lot as well. Both are really good options though, and the wildfire can potentially spread it to at least one additional target as long as you're continuously firing at them. So not a bad option there. And that is the secondary weapon. Moving on to the melee weapon, I use the long axe. Now, depending on your area, if you're in an extreme temperature area, you can obviously use the torch, which will give you bonuses in cold weather, as well as the frozen northern pike to give you bonuses in hot temperature areas. That does the same effect basically that the torch does, but for hot areas. I believe it's a 5-point reduction in heat, or cold, vice versa, depending on which one you use. And because the long axe gives the Fortress Warfare buff. The mod that I typically like to run on it is going to be the Portable Territory. After leaving Fortress Warfare, the status will remain for an additional 2 seconds. And for those of you that don't know, Fortress Warfare, how it works, if we go and check it out here, is you create an area of effect on the ground within a 2-meter radius that grants all allies heavy armor for 5 seconds. And the heavy armor basically gives super armor with weapon damage plus 20%. So you're going to activate that, get the AoE ring around your feet, and you're going to be doing 20% bonus weapon damage, which again combines perfectly with shrapnel because that is based off of weapon damage. So really good combination for a melee weapon there. And also why I put the Portable Territory mod. It'll just extend that buff even longer. So those are the weapons. Now moving on to the armor. The key piece of armor that is going to make this build as good as it can possibly get is actually the Cage Helmet. This is the first weapon that's comboed really well with the Cage Helmet. And what we're going to be running on it is the Momentum Up Violent variation with ideally crit damage, weapon damage, damage to great ones, and potentially magazine capacity. Momentum Up increases fire rate by 10%, so we can get through that ammunition faster for the first 50% of the magazine, and weapon damage plus 30% for the second half of the magazine. So by the time you get towards the end of your drum mag on the LMG, not only will we be getting bonus damage from the innate perks within the gun for burning through that ammo, but we're going to be getting bonus weapon damage as well from the Momentum Up mod. So really good mod to choose there. You could technically run Fateful Strike, but because we're not running a weak spot really damage focus build, it's not going to be as good. So that's why I run Momentum Up. For the mask, we are running 4-piece Lone Wolf set for the added increased perks for crit rate and crit damage. 1-piece bonus will give us increased magazine capacity, always good on the LMG, 5% crit rate. 3-stack bonus gives us 1 stack of Lone Wolf Shadow. With every 2 weapon critical hits, Lone Wolf Shadow grants plus 6% crit damage for 30 seconds. The effect can stack up to 8 times. And then the 4-piece bonus increases the max Lone Wolf stacks that we can get to 10, as well as give us an 8% crit rate bonus for 2 seconds after reloading. So all in all, really good perks for a shrapnel build. And that's why we're going to be going with 4 pieces. We also have 1-piece Bastille to get more weapon damage as long as our health is above 70%. 10% weapon damage to be precise. So that's what we're running there. Before go back to the mods here. For the mask, we're going to be running Targeted Strike. This is why I said the Spreading Marks mod on the Wildfire might not be a bad idea, because when hitting marked enemies, you get 10% bonus to your crit rate and 25% bonus to your crit damage. So if you can just quickly whip out your Wildfire, spread a bunch of marks to every enemy around you, switch back to your LMG, get that huge Targeted Strike perk bonus to every enemy that you're firing, it's going to be easy peasy, and you'll be able to burn down enemies much quicker. So that's what we're going to run. In theory, people might think to use some of the shrapnel mods, but Shrapnel Carnage, unfortunately, is weak spot damage dependent, and we're not really focusing on weak spot damage. So that's why I don't like that one. And then the other option would potentially be Explosive Shrapnel. If you're running the Last Valor, this is really good because you can proc shrapnel hits very, very quickly. However, with the LMG, because it's based off of how many bullets we fired and we have such a large magazine, it's going to take a very long time to reach 20 shrapnel hits. So unless you're running like Shrapnel Souvenir to have basically infinite ammunition, then you could potentially use Explosive Shrapnel because you're not worrying about ramping up as fast. You're just going to be firing infinitely. So that is one potential option. If you had to go with the shrapnel option, Explosive Shrapnel wouldn't be bad, only if you're running the Shrapnel Souvenir on the gun. But for now, because of the one that we're using for the additional part damage, we're doing Targeted Strike, and that'll combo with our Wildfire, tag anything with it, and this will give every enemy that's marked bonus damage. But moving on to the chest piece, ideally, gold mods are going to be the best if you have good substats. I like the Rejuvenating Violent variation for crit damage, weapon damage, and the other substats that I mentioned. When HP is above 60%, a kill recovers 15% loss HP. which is going to be a good combination to keep us above 70% with our Bastille armor piece to get that 10% weapon damage bonus. The other options, if you don't have a good gold mod, would be you could run the crit damage enhancement for more crit rate and crit damage, or the weapons munition amplifier to give increased weapon damage. Ideally, you would run one that has crit damage on it and weapon damage, or magazine capacity, things like that. So those are two blue mod variations that would still be good for the build if you don't have a stronger substat gold mod. But these are always in the end game the best, just because you're going to get higher power out of it, and the substats have increases to the amount max that you can get. Crit damage on a gold mod can get up to 15%, which is really, really good. So that is the top. And we're also running the Bastille top in this particular build. That's going to be our one-piece Bastille. For the pants, we have the Lone Wolf pants, and I run Deadshot Violent. Each critical hit by non-melee weapons grants plus 5% crit damage up to 45%. The effect is removed on the next reload, which we hardly ever do. This has maxed crit damage, weapon damage. Ideally, I'd have damage to great ones, potentially some more magazine capacity on here, but all around, not a bad mod. You could also technically run Bullet Siphon. This would give weapon damage plus 5% every 5 bullets consumed, which you could imagine we're going to be going through bullets like crazy, and consuming the magazine, and grants plus 4% weapon damage capped at 20%. So this is potentially really good if you have good substats on it. Unfortunately, I don't have a good substats Bullet Siphon mod right now, and we're lacking a little bit in crit damage. So Deadshot Violent, in my opinion, is a little bit better, at least with the mods I have. You can run either or. They're actually pretty close, depending on what your substats are. Whatever you're lacking, go with the one that suits it a little bit better. But for me, I run Deadshot Violent. For the gloves, we have the Lone Wolf gloves. And for this one, I like to run Crit Boost because, as I mentioned before, our critical rate is going to be one of the lowest stats that we have in this build, and Crit Boost will give us 15% bonus crit rate. I've got maxed crit damage on it, magazine capacity, and damage against elites and normal enemies, just to kind of round out the normal mob damage bonuses a little bit. So that is a really good mod there. You technically could run crit amplifier as well to get 10% crit rate and 15 crit damage. We've already got pretty decent crit damage on this build though, so having the higher crit rate, in my opinion, is a little bit more beneficial. And then last but not least, for the boots, we have the Lone Wolf boots, and the end-all be-all best mod, in my opinion, is going to be the Gold Covered Advance mod, Violent Variation for the guaranteed crit damage, weapon damage, and damage to great ones. Ideally, this has max HP, which is nice. You could get more max ammunition or mag capacity, but all in all, taking no damage within 4 seconds will grant a 20% melee weapon and status damage boost for 30 seconds. So really good gold mod for the boots. Pretty much the standard across almost all builds now. So that is the armor. Here is a quick shot of what our stats are looking like. Let me switch over to the LMG. So we are sitting at 28, just shy of 30% crit rate, 114% crit damage. These will obviously increase with some of our Cradle Perks that I'll go over here in a minute, and our armor, or not armor, but weapon perks as things ramp up. 38 weak spot damage. Towards the bottom, we've got 45% bonus shrapnel damage. So all in all, a very well-rounded build, and handles pretty much any end-game content with ease. But moving on to the Memetics Cradle, here is the perks, at least in the way of winter, that I chose. You're definitely going to want to take Anti-Void when using rifles, shotguns, or heavy weapons. Your damage is increased by 15% with an additional 100% damage to super anomalies. The Void variants, we're obviously using the LMG as a primary weapon, so that is why we run this. In the second row, you want Tactical Combo, 25% bonus weapon damage after switching weapons or reloading. I take Deviation Master. While a deviation is present, damage against great ones and bosses is increased by 25%. I take Lone Walker when I'm running things solo, and when in a party, you can run something like increased side-by-side for durability loss, or Fortress Link, something like that. But this is a flex one depending on whether or not you're in a party. But Lone Walker, when fighting solo, medicine usage cooldown is negative 30%. And when HP is below 40%, medicine usage speed is increased by 30%. And the healing effect increased by 15% as well. Third column, we have Deadly Combo. After triggering bullet effects such as shrapnel, your bullet effect damage will be increased by 25% for 4 seconds. I'm also taking Steady Hand while in Fortress Warfare or Fast Gunner. We're going to be using Fortress Warfare when we activate our Long Axe. Weak spot damage increased by 40%, and weak spot damage to enemies marked with Bullseye by another 20%. Next column, we have Tracking Bullet. Dealing weak spot damage against or damage grants a plus 2.5% shrapnel damage bonus, and you get plus 3.5% shrapnel crit damage for 6 seconds up to 10 stacks. So as long as you're hitting the weak spots of enemies, this is going to give a big damage boost as well. And then last but not least, in the final row, I like to take Bounty Hunter, hitting a marked target, which we're going to be doing all the time with our Wildfire Hand Cannon. It'll grant plus 5% weapon damage for 8 seconds, and that can stack up to 6 times. Switching weapons will remove half of the stacks. This is the one that, for Lone Walker, if you want to swap them, you could do Fortress Link here. That is another one that you could potentially do to increase the bonuses of our Fortress Warfare buff even more, and give us that 25% damage or 20% damage bonus for even longer. So that's the option you could pick there. But that is the Cradle Perks that I like to run. As for Deviation, as you see here, the one that I like to run is the Wolf. This gives bonus weapon damage when you summon it to enemies that are attacked by the Wolf. It can actually duplicate itself if it kills an enemy, so you can get a pack of like 4 or 5 of these things. And its bonus that you get to weapon damage will increase with the skill rating, and because shrapnel is all based around weapon damage, that's why I feel like the Wolf is the best deviation to use for shrapnel builds. So that is the deviation I use. And then last but not least, the final thing I want to go over are some good food options for this particular build. You obviously could run canned meat. That will give a 20% bonus to shrapnel damage. But the best in slot one, in my opinion, would be crumbly bread. That will increase all weapon damage, which shrapnel damage is based off of, by another 25%. We do got some interesting new ones as well. You could run ginger poppers. Why it only gives 10% shrapnel damage as opposed to the purple canned meat one, I don't know, because this one is a little bit harder to craft. But if you have an abundance of some of the new plants that we're getting in the Way of Winter, this is another shrapnel-based food item that you could potentially run. You've got for drinks, iced tea isn't bad. For increased roll speed, movement speed, things like that. Bone-in deviated sausage would give you bonus damage to bosses. So that's another one. So those are the main go-to food items that I would recommend for a shrapnel build in particular. Obviously, if you're going into high-risk zones, especially later on in the later phases when the weather's going to get more extreme, you could save up and start crafting, where is it here? The all-weather stew. That's going to increase your max stamina by 30% and boost both your heat and cold resistance by 30. You're not going to get any bonus to shrapnel damage and your overall damage, but you'll have much better survivability. So that is the food items I would recommend. Now for the armor, one last thing that I wanted to point out is we can put hides and things on our armor now when we're crafting it. And if you remember when I was talking about the weapon element for the new LMG is going to be impact. And if you go to your helmet for the cage helmet and go to the type of hide you can use, you'll notice that we have one in particular that is going to be really good. Or no, I'm sorry, not the helmet, the mask. I don't know what I was thinking. If you go to hides and go to deer hide, there's going to be 3 different types of deer hides that you can get. But basic deer hide will give you a 10% increase to impact damage, which will boost your damage a little bit more, specifically for the LMG. The Highland deer and forest deer will give you a little bit more. I think it's 15% for the forest deer, and then the Highland deer is 10% as well, but it's going to be an increase to impact crit rates, which is going to be nice. So not a bad boost in damage there. Hides, deer hide in particular, is what I would recommend at least putting on your mask, because that's going to do bonus damage with the LMG. So not many people pointed that out, but that is what I would recommend tip-wise for your armor. And yeah, that is pretty much the build. Because the dummies are unfortunately bugged right now, you can't even shoot them when you place them down. I'll probably just play through some in-game footage here of me taking down some of the bosses and clearing out a couple different areas. So I'll leave you guys to that. But without any further ado, if you guys enjoyed it, if you liked it, be sure to smash that like button, comment down below. And if you want to keep up to date with my future content, consider subscribing and turn on that notification bell. And then last but not least, if you want to join a killer community of like-minded gamers, feel free to check the links down in the description and join us on the Discord. We've got over 1,000 members in there now, many of which are playing Once Human. So hopefully you jump in and we see you guys around here soon. Until the next one, though, hope everyone has a great day, and we'll see you all later.